Hi, this is Greg Kesich, editorial page editor at the Portland Press Herald, and I'm here for this podcast with Alan Caron, one of our Sunday columnists, and the disembodied voice of Jim Fossel. I guess we're all disembodied voices if you're listening to this as a podcast, but Jim is disembodied to us and is coming to us through a Skype connection.
Miraculous.
Very happy to have him here.
Apparatus.
And so we'd like to talk about probably today the goings on in Washington around the Gorsuch nomination and the filibuster and our senators' positions on that. There's kind of an exciting battle going on over the minimum wage that was passed at referendum last year. But Alan, let's start out with what's going on in Augusta regarding Republican attacks on Democratic leaders and the kind of reaction and blowback that's caused.
Yeah, you had the sort of predictable attacks that you get at this stage in the legislature. All the black and white pictures of horrible people in Augusta trying to kill you. I thought what was striking in this one that you wrote about a few days ago was the Senate president saying, hey, knock it off. We got to do a budget here. Take 60 votes. Go away. I read something from Rep. Higgins, Dover Foxcroft, basically said, I'm ashamed of this and we got to stop this stuff. So but what struck me even more was the use of children to deliver flyers to legislators and in the halls holding, 10-year-olds holding signs attacking legislators. And obviously they couldn't know what they were doing. And so there's no fault of theirs, but the manipulation of children in this way, to me, is a red flag. It's not the first time it's happened, but it really ought to be a place where we draw the line when you have this sort of angry, extreme politics being held in placards by 10-year-olds. And it raises questions about how well those children are being cared for.
Well, we've seen tough demonstrations before. I'm thinking about the 91 shutdown when the whole Hall of Flags was filled with union members and lawmakers had a really hard time getting in.
Yeah.
How is this different? How is this? Do you think this is a matter of degree different?
I think it's a matter of degree. I certainly think the kid thing, Jim may know more. It may have seen this before. I was thunderstruck by the pictures I saw of these kids who obviously were not there because they were concerned that somebody had missed a filing deadline or for whatever reason. They were there because a parent or guardian or somebody who should have known better dragged them into those halls and turned them into and sort of weaponized them. And I think that's offensive to me. Rep. Higgins in his statement also used the same words. It's offensive. And I just think that's where we have to stop. That goes too far.
So what do you think, Jim? Weaponized children?
Well, this isn't the first time we've seen children at political events. There were plenty of people who brought their kids to the women's protest in D.C. last month.
Sure.
And had them hold signs and, wear hats and whatnot. So unfortunately, I think this kind of thing is just going to escalate and continue.
Yeah.
What's driving it?
I think it's just, it's just like with anytime they negotiate the budget, they bring in people who are affected by the budget. It tugs at people's emotional heartstrings.
Yeah, this was a little different, Jim. This wasn't about budget cuts or programs being lost or fear of loss of rights. This was really the manipulation of children who had no direct or even indirect connection to the issue. Again, it may be that I'm more offended by it than others because I saw the pictures and I could see the expressions on those kids' faces. You want adults to like you, you want to do what you're asked to do, but to have kids holding up angry black and white blow-ups of Sarah Gideon and really employing language that we wouldn't want our kids to use at the house or at dinner. I just thought, and I looked into the group that's behind it. This was reported. It was Republican State Committee. Okay, they did a rather nasty little flyer into mailer into my neighborhood with a sort of unrecognizable black and white witch photo of Sarah Gideon. But the group that was doing most of it is a New England basically out of state group that's hell bent on an uprising, and the language just dripped with hatred. And it saddens me that this is what is coming to Maine. I mean, it's been coming for a long time. I get it. I've been involved in politics, as all of us have, but it just seems like we got to draw the line somewhere.
What struck me was that it was not so much the children, but the nature of the message and the flyers and everything were something I'm used to seeing during a campaign, at the end of a campaign. And this was done, it's not even an election year. It's a kind of like a permanent campaign organization feeling to it, rather than somebody advocating for a specific policy position.
Right, and this is part of turning everything into a permanent campaign. We saw that same thing with the Gorsuch nomination, and with ads and websites and campaigns online about Supreme Court nomination.
Right.
I mean, everything is now a permanent campaign. This always happens constantly, and it's just going to continue to seep down to the state level as well, unfortunately.
And I think that's what Thibodeau was responding to, is that campaigns, you want to simplify everything as much as possible, but there's nothing simple about a budget, and you're balancing off all kinds of interests, and you've got to keep people's goodwill involved. And so governing and campaigning used to be two different things, and it's going to be hard if they're not.
Yeah, and there you saw a direct clash between governing and campaign.
Yeah.
And which the governing guy says, hey, you're not helping me. I got to do a job here. We all have to do a job, and you guys need to knock it off.
Yeah.
And so you wonder how much of that tension exists, not only in Augusta, certainly I think it exists in Washington right now, where, and in some respects, the Trump administration is still feeling their way through. They're in perpetual campaign mode, as near as I can tell. I mean, they're just it seems to me, trying to figure out how to move from campaigning to governing. And during the day they govern, and at nighttime they do campaign tweets.
Uh-huh.
But it's got to be frustrating there. But this is the first time I'd seen this clash here in Augusta.
Yeah. Well, Jim, we've been kind of speculating all year that this is all a prelude. This session is all a prelude to the Senate campaign of 2018. And a lot of what the governor is doing is kind of positioning himself politically rather than trying to put forward an agenda. And I'm wondering what you think about that. I mean, is this what the 2018 Senate campaign is going to look like?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's hard to run a federal race on state issues.
Right. But an issue is everybody's corrupt is not really an issue. I mean, you can apply that almost any way.
Right, yeah, but I mean, as far as, his actual policy proposals and the budget, it's hard to make that about federal issues. Certainly when he goes after Senator King on certain federal issues, then he's making it political. But I don't see how he's using the budget or his policy proposal as a way to advance any future campaigns. And frankly, I'm not sure he's going to have a future campaign. So
yeah, right. I mean, that's certainly not a given, but it just strikes me as if you have an excuse for not accomplishing anything, is that the place is a corrupt swamp where nobody can be trusted, then you can apply that to a federal race. But
well, yeah, but
fair enough. Let's.
if he thinks that about Augusta, does he really want to go down to D.C.?
I don't know why anybody does, but apparently people do. There seems to be at least two people running for every seat every 2 years. So
it seems to me it's a mistake. I wrote this in the column for this weekend. It's a mistake for Republicans to attack Sarah Gideon in this way as as a personality, because I know Sarah well, and she doesn't fit any of that stuff. She doesn't. So,
but she doesn't have to, because nobody else knows her.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
the thing.
That's
yeah.
the thing is that outside the State House, hardly anybody knows who the legislative leadership is.
But they
People
do
don't
know
who
her
Mike
in
Thibodeau
the.
is, and they don't know who Sarah Gideon is, and nobody
They
cares.
do know her in the State House, and I think that was a factor in why Thibodeau came out, and why Higgins is said, and other things will be said and done, because they know she doesn't fit that. I mean, Thibodeau said it's just not true.
Right.
So I think, she's known by other people in the legislature that she has to work with. And if you spend any time with her, she's not she's honest, she's hardworking. She's a Democrat, but she's not that partisan. Even though she's Speaker, she has to be. But I just think she's the wrong one to pick on. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out.
Well, we don't have John Martin to kick around anymore. So
I know. It was so much fun.
The gift that keeps giving. I think actually you do.
Yeah.
we do, actually. But, he's laying low lately.
Yeah. I know. He's the voice of reason and bipartisanship. Okay. Also in Augusta this week, there was a pretty hot hearing on minimum wage bills, and Jim, you've written about this that the legislature does not apparently feel bound by the people's voice in referendums, and there's a talk of a major revision of the most popular of the referendums, increasing the minimum wage and eventually evening out the wage for tip workers. What's your sense? I mean, it looks like there's going to be enough Democratic votes. If you just count the Democrats who have co-sponsored the legislation, there's enough Democratic votes to turn back that piece of the bill, at least. And is that your sense? And is that a good thing?
I think it is a good thing. I mean, I think that the minimum wage referendum was really poorly thought out when they wrote it, or that in fact they intended that all along and didn't really want to focus on that during the campaign. But I think at the same time, I think if the legislature does make major changes to it, they should send it back to the voters and give the voters a chance to have a say on it separately. Because I think a lot of people voted for that either not understanding the impact of it or voting for it in spite of that. And if they had a chance to vote on the tip wage referendum, on the tip wage issue by itself, it might not pass.
Oh, so that's interesting. So, make the change in the tip wage subject to another referendum.
Yeah, refer it back to the people.
Yeah.
We're already going to have we're already going to have the casino on the ballot this fall, so probably wouldn't cost that much more money to add another question.
Sure.
It is
and
interesting.
And then you can't say you're overriding the will of the voters.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that people are so cavalierly talking about ignoring the votes of the voters, particularly on the education issue. Which, Republicans straight out want to repeal. That is an astonishing shift from where we were even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly. You couldn't imagine a political leader standing in the legislature saying, well, they didn't know what they were doing.
Right.
So we're just going to ignore it, or we're going to repeal it. It's stunning to me, and there's a parallel with what's going on in Washington, I think, with the filibuster rule we saw today. This sort of indifference to tradition and rule that's happened surprisingly quickly, I think. Uh-huh. But I don't know about you, Jim, but I can't remember anything like this. I mean, just a complete indifference to what the voters said. First on bond issues, of course, and now on these referenda issues. And that's not a defense of those issues, but it's a commentary on the process that people.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I can think of a perfect example. The original referendum on funding education at 55% has been ignored by the legislature for over a decade since it was first passed.
Right.
That's why this new referendum was passed. So it's not, usually they don't. It's not quite as openly discussed, but it's hardly unheard of to either ignore or rewrite.
Yeah, that one was simply not acted on.
Well, it was. Right, I mean, exactly. they made progress on it for a number of years, and then the recession hit. Yeah. And then it stopped. Yeah. So they never quite got there, but it was like, had it not been for the 2008 recession, it probably would have happened by now.
Yeah. On straight referenda issues, it used to be third rail.
Right.
If for a politician to even suggest that in the first 5 years after a referendum, you would tinker with it in any way, because you'd be saying the voters were stupid, or you didn't care about.
That's
right.
That's why I say if you make a change, send it back out to the voters.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. I mean, it's I don't think there's ever been a legislature since they passed term limits where you didn't have a majority in both houses that thought term limits were a bad idea.
Yeah.
You know. And they won't touch it.
Yeah.
You know,
but if they want to repeal it, that's fine. Just send it out for another vote.
Yeah. But it looks like that's not going to happen. It looks like they're gonna take it back, and they're not going to. As far as I can see, it looks as if they're going to do what Alan just said, and just ignore the referendum result, and I don't think they're expecting any bad consequences.
Well, and I think if they do that, they'll see the Maine People's Alliance just come back with more referendums.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what happens to this is a core Democratic issue. I mean, big D Democrat, going back to Franklin Roosevelt, and for them to to fail to take the ball across the goal line here, I can't believe that's not going to hurt them. If nothing else, it's going to sap enthusiasm, and
it'll also drive a wedge to the Democratic Party and the Maine People's Alliance.
Right. Already there, apparently.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too.
Yeah, judging from right with the kind of comments we were hearing yesterday, and I think they are canvassing in certain legislative districts for the people who have come out and co-sponsored, and that's the thing to me that's really a surprise. Is it's one thing to say in caucus, look, if you need to go back to your people and vote against this, I understand. But to have Democrats co-sponsoring bills that will actually take money out of poor people's pockets is a big surprise, and to me that just shows that they're not pushing it, they're not whipping it.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see if the MPA or some other group falls through against Democrats who go along with it.
Right. And I get it. It's not every district is the same, and just because it passed, with 54% of the vote statewide doesn't mean it passed 54% in every district. But
right.
Yeah, and there's also a sense of confusion in the Democratic Party,
right,
about why they keep losing. And what do they have to do differently? And I think you have an emerging block of, you might call them moderate Democrats or pro-business Democrats, who are not altogether happy with the direction they've been taken over the last 6 or 8 years. So I think that's bubbling under the surface as well. And it may be a wedge, it may be growth pains, I don't know what it is, but I think the party doesn't have a clear sense of direction, and it's being led by these outside groups that are doing referendums. And there are people who are extremely uncomfortable about that as the way you define the direction and future of the party. So I think there may be a healthy little tug and push going on here. Look, it's not unlike what's happened in the Republican Party at the national level over health care and other issues, and at the state level as well.
So what happens if, say, is the Medicaid expansion on the ballot for November?
I believe it is.
I mean, they have the
Right,
signatures. What happens if that passes? I mean, you're going to have to that's going to take a real push from the legislature to implement that over the head of a governor and commissioner of human services who's against it.
Right. Yeah, Jim. What are you going to do?
What are you going to do about that? How are you going to?
That'll be interesting. I mean, largely it'll be up to the next governor to address, really.
Yeah.
If it passes in 17.
Yeah, because I mean, all you would have to do is a supplemental budget to address it in 18. And then anything else would be up to the next legislature and the next governor.
Sure. Okay.
So they could just leave it alone and let the next people deal with it, or they could just skate by, or they could actually address it head on. But I mean, I think they'd be inclined to do as little as they could to implement it and just let the next legislature deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a challenge to it, I expect, as well. I haven't seen the language, but my memory serves me from the days when I did referendums. You cannot, by initiative, cause the state to spend money. That was one of the weaknesses of the 55%. You can indicate a direction and desire, but you cannot impose spending on the state. So it restricts all kinds of referendums. So I'm not sure how artfully this one is written that gets around that, but it may be in a strict legal sense it cannot be binding.
But also people tend not to challenge the legality of referendums, so.
Yeah, well, in this case, there might be an exception, but I tried to do one years ago to bring the trains back. And
right.
You couldn't, that was a perfect example. You couldn't impose spending on the state by referendum.
Right.
You can't do it. Here, if you're saying the state should spend the 10% or whatever it has to spend to expand Medicaid, I just don't see how you do that.
So you can you initiate a bond?
No.
Okay. Didn't know that.
Yeah. I'm not 100% certain about that last question, but I know by referendum initiative you can't impose spending at all.
Right. You can just create language that would require spending, but you can't actually appropriate the funds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't demand of the state that it spends money. So that makes those kinds of bills a little squishy.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting point. I'll be interested to see what happens with that.
Yeah, I suspect someone's going to be paying attention.
Right. All right. So down to Washington, we've got two senators. Both of them are viewed nationally as moderates. I know there's a lot of disputing that here in Maine, but that's the truth. Is nationally they're both seen as moderates, and they are going diametrically different directions on a very contentious Supreme Court nomination, and why is that, and what does it mean? Who wants to start out?
Jim.
Well, I mean, I think to me the most interesting thing about this was King deciding to join in on the Democrats, not only opposing the nomination, but with the filibuster as well. I thought he might go halfway on this and vote against the nomination, but not vote for the filibuster, or vice versa. But
right.
I didn't think that he would actually vote for the filibuster, because several years ago he said he thought there shouldn't even be a filibuster anymore.
Right.
So it's kind of a reversal for him. For Susan, she continues to support nominees that she thinks are qualified.
But she's also supporting a simple majority change of the rules, which she has been very strict about her procedural votes, being wanting to maintain the prerogatives of the institution and the traditions of the institution.
Right, but she also pointed out today that when they made the original agreement with the Gang of 13 years ago, that part of the condition was that the judicial filibuster only be used in extraordinary circumstances.
Right.
And having a nominee you don't like isn't an extraordinary circumstance. So I think she was frustrated by this situation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna believe that they both came to their positions honestly, but the reality is this isn't an issue you can be on the fence on.
Yeah.
Even Bruce Poliquin couldn't be on the fence on this issue. So you have to. You got to pick one. Pick the side you're with and go with it. And I think to me,
for both votes, right?
That's what they both did in the end. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that these weren't heartfelt, honest positions, but at the end of the day, unless you have extreme hostility to the position your party is taking, you're going to end up with the party you're most comfortable with. None of it surprised me. I was a little surprised that Angus. I thought Angus was pretty much on the fence on this thing, and he says he was until the hearings. I watched those hearings. It was pretty frustrating that you couldn't get any sense out of Gorsuch of really how he would vote.
I thought the listening session that he did in Portland indicated to me that he was very open to Gorsuch. He had he had a panel with a former Gorsuch clerk talking about him and saying very complimentary things about the way he addressed issues. So I think it's something that happened since then, and I have to believe it has something to do with all the demonstrations and the calls to the offices. And I don't think he just adds up his phone messages, but I think that's got to have had some impact on the decision. And I think
it also.
Go ahead.
It also is. I mean, as I said when I wrote about it, he was in a tough place. Whether he voted for him or against him, he was going to get flack for it from the right or the left. So
right.
If he had, and in this case, he decided it was easier for him not to annoy his base.
Right. But you're right. So when he was running, it was like a pox on both their houses. Washington's dysfunctional. I'm open to filibuster reform. And when Harry Reid, did push through the rule change in 2013, he was supportive of that. As was the Portland Press Herald, Maine Sunday Telegram all the way through. So this is something that's a long time in coming. Certainly goes back to the George W. Bush's second term. In some cases, you can say it goes back to the Bork nomination, but this idea that the 60 vote threshold is going to make people be bipartisan ignores the fact that they stopped being bipartisan a long time ago.
Right.
And
the question to me is going forward. Do we have a vote like this on other issues? And if we do, then I think it's it's open. It's even more open warfare than it is now, and I think the institution begins to disintegrate in some way.
Yeah.
So we'll see if that happens. If Republicans get so frustrated by the filibuster doing to them what they did to the Obama administration for 7.5 years, if they get emboldened by this to eliminate the filibuster on other issues, picking off particular ones, then I think it's going to be.
I mean, part of the problem with the response on the health care was to craft a bill that could be passed through reconciliation.
Right.
And if you don't need 60 votes, you don't have to do that. Yep. So it seems like it's just a matter of time before the filibuster on legislation is gone.
I think that'll take much more to do. And I think that with the narrow Senate majority the Republicans have, first of all, if they did eliminate the filibuster in some ways, that would increase the importance of both of our senators.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't think that every Republican would go along with it for legislation the way they did for the Supreme Court nomination.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, a lot harder to do.
Yeah, I think people like John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Susan Collins would have trouble going along with it for a bad health care bill.
Yeah.
But you know what I saw recently? Medicaid in 1965 for 66 passed with a majority vote. It was not filibustered, and it passed something like 54-46.
Yeah, and it also had bipartisan support.
Right. Medicaid, right? Without, there was a huge Democratic majority then.
Yeah.
And they had I think they chose to let a lot of people vote against it. But for whatever reason, yeah. But it's that's sort of the when people talk about the high point of bipartisanship, it was that whole kind of post-war period.
Well, I mean, whether you have a filibuster or not, either in the House or the Senate, it's better for major legislation to have bipartisan support anyway.
Sure.
Otherwise, the next Congress can just repeal it, as we're seeing with Obamacare now.
Well, is that what we're seeing?
Well, we're seeing them try.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean,
it's always better to get bipartisan support anyway, with or without a filibuster.
I think that's true, but I think also we got to remember that when there was real bipartisanism, that's not really a word, but when things were more bipartisan, the world was a different kind of place, and there were other ties besides party that made people vote together. There were regional issues. There were many issues that are highly partisan today. Didn't used to be bipartisan. It didn't used to be partisan. Birth control, environmental policy, and it's just the way the world has devolved is that everything is a 50-50 issue. It seems like.
Well, right, but that's no way to govern long term. That's a way to campaign, not to govern.
Right, which gets us back to the top. I mean, so if you were advising somebody in Washington, what could you do? I don't know if you heard Chris Coons from Delaware gave a very a good speech today about kind of conceding that the filibuster is gone for Supreme Court nominations and pledging to work with the other side to try to find a way to prevent this from happening again. I just wondered, what would you advise him?
Or her.
Or her.
And how to work in the
How do you put Humpty Dumpty back together again? How do you create a sense of common purpose when there's so much pressure on the even in the centrists to be polarized?
Well, it's funny. I was just talking about this earlier today. A good example of some good bipartisan work that's being done right now that hasn't resulted in legislation yet, but I think will eventually, is Cory Booker and Rand Paul have been working on legal justice reform together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of an obscure topic, but it's one that impacts a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's issues like that, issues that haven't been partisanized yet, that you can actually work together and begin to find common ground with people and hopefully bring in the administration and bring in the Democrats and get things done, like with the infrastructure spending that the president wants to do.
Well, I'm sure the White House would love to have a win on something.
Yeah, where is it?
Yeah.
But maybe it's in criminal justice reform, although,
That's not a big campaign promise.
No, it isn't.
No, it wasn't. But it's one of those issues that doesn't get as much attention as it should.
Yeah, no, it's a good issue. But on that point, where does Trump get a victory? Where does he not run into the same divisions that he ran into in healthcare? It's hard to. I can't see the issue. You'd think it'd be infrastructure, but then you get people who don't want to spend money. They've been opposing infrastructure spending for a decade, and they ran on it. So you got to deal with that block.
Right. I mean, I think if he worked with the Democrats on the infrastructure spending, he can get the moderate Republicans, and then he can ignore the people who don't want to spend any money.
Yeah. But doesn't that drive a wedge into his own party?
Yeah.
I mean, sort of widen.
He's kind of done that already. So.
Widen the divide. I know. Well, that depends on what day.
Yeah.
But even that, it's hard to imagine if there are not that many moderates in the House, and you have that rule where you can't bring up an issue unless you have a majority of the majority. And I suppose the speaker could waive that, but it really doesn't create a lot of room to bring in Democrats and shut out the Freedom Caucus.
Well, and I think if they continue to be intransient, then the White House will push the speaker to work around them one way or the other. And really, he's got to work around them because if he can't bring anybody else on board if he brings them on board.
Right. Yeah, that's the healthcare problem now. You placate them, you lose others.
Right.
I mean, you can't appease people who don't want to spend any money by not spending any money because you don't get to do anything you want to do.
This is the group that's sort of got rid of its predecessor, and so once you ice them out, they start to agitate against the speaker within the House.
Yeah.
Because now you've got open warfare in your own caucus. I mean, it's just a hard thing to see where the winning issue is for Trump right now.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to see.
Yeah. I don't know. The closest I can think of is the infrastructure, but that's going to take a while to put together.
Yeah.
Right. And
That's
particularly
months in the making.
Particularly the way it was described in the campaign, which was just a few $100 billion in tax credits to build toll roads for, that's not going to hit. Certainly, it's not going to hit Maine.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think Trump promised the largest infrastructure investment we've ever seen.
$1 trillion.
Yeah, $1 trillion.
But it's like,
good luck with that.
It's like how much money he puts down when he builds a building.
Yeah, right.
It's like,
here's my $10 in my name.
You get to use my name. Yeah. Your tax dollars at work.
Don't pay anybody.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot of Trump highways. Yeah.
All right.
Jim, what are you writing about this week?
Budgeting issues in both D.C. and Augusta.
It's an interesting, the difference between having to come up with a budget and not, going they can go years without one in Washington. But you were more optimistic than I am about sort of core ideas of LePage's budget showing up in the final product.
I think some version of them will show up in the final product in some ways, but they'll be watered down, just like they were last time.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there was some tax relief in the last budget, but it wasn't nearly enough.
Uh-huh. And
that's what happens when you have a split legislature.
Right.
Yeah.
And as I said in the column, even when Republicans have full control, it's not really full control because there are these groups.
You mean within the caucus?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's true in Augusta as well as in D.C.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's coalition building.
Yeah, which of course they have to do in Augusta.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Don't have to do in Washington, really.
Right. In Augusta, they have the advantage of nobody knows what they're doing. Even if we cover it, it's just sort of not that interesting, and they can kind of do things in private in a way that they can't in Washington. Everything is scrutinized.
Yeah. See, Democrats unveiled their new budget today.
Did they?
Oh, yeah.
See?
With much fanfare.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it's what you'd expect.
Uh-huh.
Invest in the future.
Uh-huh.
So let the games begin, as they say.
I think everybody wants to invest in the future.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
There we go, bipartisan budget.
Yeah. There you go.
Nobody should be opposed to investing in the future.
Right, because the future will
Especially
be here.
our children.
Yeah. Right. Even in the oldest state in the country, children are our future.
Yeah.
Old people are our future. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull this column off, but I have them in my on my list. I want to do a column where I ask a bunch of people, when's the last time you changed your mind on an important issue or a deeply held belief? And because I cannot remember, and I don't think most people can.
Yeah.
How about you, Jim? When's the last time you changed your mind on something that really mattered? Based on more information. Based on getting
time to think.
Based on getting more information. This is why I didn't write the column this week.
That's kind of a subjective question.
Yeah.
What really matters?
Well, I guess a strongly held belief.
Okay. I guess I used to be more firmly against drug legalization than I am now.
Okay.
But I was never that. I never was that strongly opinionated one way or the other about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's more evolution than changing. I mean,
Right.
I think a lot of people have evolved on gay marriage and lots of other issues.
Yeah.
Socially in a bigger sense, but to actually
I was never really
change-
against gay marriage, but
Yeah.
I don't really care much about the social issues.
Right. But right. We don't. There's very few. You read about Whittaker Chambers, who was like, a 10 out of 10 communist spy who became like a 10 out of 10 conservative magazine editor and eventually exposed Alger Hiss back in the 40s. That's a fascinating story.
And people going from one extreme to the other is not that uncommon, actually.
Yeah. Mussolini, the ardent socialist.
Right.
Barry Goldwater becoming pro-choice.
Yeah. Although he was always kind of libertarian, wasn't he?
He was, but I mean, he was a diehard conservative when he ran for president, and then he became more moderate as the years went on.
As is the case with all of us.
Yeah. we just forget what our old positions were. That's what happens.
Yeah, you don't really evolve; you just forget.
Yeah, just get tired. Whatever. Yeah.
I'm tired of that one.
Yeah. Do we have to vote on Maine Yankee again?
Can't say that again.
I mean, Angus King involved in the filibuster this week. Does that count?
Yes, he did. Yeah. What do you got coming up? I know you got.
I wrote about the Sarah Gideon thing. I'm working on something about the end of jobs.
Interesting.
I'm going to do that in like 2 weeks when I come back from vacation.
Like the Uber situation.
Build on stuff I've written in the past about how mechanization has killed blue collar jobs. Now computerization is killing pink collar jobs. And if you
the increase of automation,
if you take this to artificial intelligence, it begins to eat away at the infrastructure of jobs. And so if you project enough forward, we have huge social problems now and we just saw them in this last election, because of the loss of jobs to mechanization among blue-collar people. What happens to a society that actually begins to lose 20 or 30 or 40% of its jobs? And what are the social problems and political problems? We're at the leading edge of that. So, it'll just be a peer into the future thing, but it's happening to us right now. We're so ill prepared for what's been happening in this country. And even the way we measure it, measuring unemployment rate that gives you like 4% or 5%, it's ridiculous because it stops measuring people after 6 months. So there's no real indicator of or people move from great jobs to terrible jobs. We just count them as employed.
Yeah.
Even though there isn't a transformative social change going on. So I just think it'll be kind of fun to peer into the future and think about what happens when, and we ask everybody, what's your job right now? And do you have a job that couldn't be replaced by artificial intelligence? And there aren't going to be that many people who say yes, and if there are, everybody's going to be crowding into their job.
Yeah.
As the ice cake melts and gets smaller.
Right. And in newspapers, it's not so much we're going to be replaced. It's like we're just not going to exist.
Well, that's a form. But
it's right. It used to be that the technology created this very high barrier to entry. And the people who control the press actually, not metaphorically, the actual physical press had a monopoly on the content.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, like, content got democratized.
Yeah.
And, and that's a technological change. You could say that's automation. People get the information delivered to them wherever they are. We can talk to Jim in Boston. Yeah.
So let's look at the jobs that dry up first in delivery. In the production of paper, in the cutting of trees, all that stuff, it all ripples out. And,
and this gets back to the minimum wage issue too.
Yeah.
Although I think it speaks for the higher minimum wage, because the kinds of jobs that are not going away and that are growing are these low end service jobs.
Except that'll encourage. The higher minimum wage encourages big companies to pursue automation in those areas too.
But you can't automate a CNA, in a nursing home.
No, but you can sure automate a McDonald's employee.
Okay, but don't you think that they're going to do that anyway? Wouldn't you rather if you had a machine that could do the same thing as a person? you're going to pick the machine, especially if you're a big corporation. I mean, the kinds of jobs that are increasing are in medical care, service, restaurants, including the even if some of the fast food jobs are eliminated, you're certainly not going to save those jobs by keeping the workers at a very low pay.
Well, partially the reason that the healthcare jobs are increasing is because the healthcare industry is consuming our entire economy. Right.
That's true.
And that's not a good thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's getting to be a bigger and bigger sector because other things are falling away.
Right. And also because that's becoming more and more expensive.
Right, but not because of orderlies and janitors. It's the kind of prescription drugs. And I know that people at Maine Health tell me I'm wrong, but it's got to be this building boom has got to be having some big role in what we spend on healthcare.
Nationally, certainly. Maine handles that relatively better than other places, but
sure. But I mean, still, they're putting a $500 million building on Congress Street, and what other industry is building a $500 million plant in Maine?
That's true. Good point.
Not a casino.
Yeah, true.
So, not a paper mill. So, anyway,
it's not a good sign that healthcare is becoming such a huge percentage of our economy.
No.
Well, that's I think a good topic for next time, because I would love to talk about what we can do about that. I heard the guy from Martins Point, David House, speak yesterday, and he's a very smart guy at the Chamber, Eggs and Issues. Yeah. Basically, they're taking like a population health approach. They're looking at what it is that makes people sick and trying to address it. And some of it is like behavioral, some of it is social and economic factors, and then some of it's environment, which he said is mostly housing. And I don't know that a health insurance company can address all those, but that's if you're talking really about getting people healthier, there's a lot of things that you don't normally consider medicine that need to be addressed. But that's the liberal approach. And
a big part of the problem with both the liberal approach and the conservative approach on healthcare is that they focus too much on health insurance and not on the health care.
I'm saying a focus on the things that make people sick. So before they even make a claim on their insurance.
Right, but also we need to focus on that, but preventative care, yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm
saying. We need to focus on how to reduce the cost of care in general, rather than reducing the cost of healthcare insurance.
Right,
that's the real issue: is the cost of care. If the cost of care were lower, nobody would care who paid for insurance.
Right. Yeah. So, and where's the consensus in Washington to do that?
Nowhere.
That's a place where you might get agreement, as long as the insurance industries and the drug companies went in the room.
Yeah.
Well, that's the problem: is the insurance industry has no desire to reduce the cost of care for anybody.
Nope.
Right. Now, I think you got to find the what you were talking about earlier, that sort of obscure corner of it that hasn't been politicized yet, and trying to build off that. All right. So
allow the states to experiment more.
Okay. Well, we've got consensus on that almost. Thank you, Jim. This was fun, and I think it worked good. So we'll try to do this again next week.
Jim.
Thanks for listening to the Portland Press Herald Podcast. Make sure you never miss a podcast episode by subscribing on iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. For more of our podcasts, visit pressherald.com/podcasts. Follow the link there to this episode to leave a comment. You can also leave a comment on our Facebook page. I'm Chad Gilley. Once again, thank you for listening to the Portland Press Herald Podcast.